The Denobulans had terrorized the galaxy for decades, until they made a fatal mistake, killing a human child. Now the full fury of humanity would be unleashed upon them with a vengeance that would make the blackness of space itself tremble. Incoming distress signal from the colony on Denobula Bu, Lieutenant Chen reported, his voice tense. They're under attack. Captain Robert Bailey gripped the armrests of his command chair aboard the UES Retribution as it dropped out of warp. He had been expecting a routine patrol mission in the Denobula system, not a crisis. The view screen flashed to life, revealing a scene of utter devastation. Denobulan warships mercilessly bombarded the human settlement below, explosions ripping through the fragile infrastructure. Smoke billowed from the ruins as buildings crumbled. Robert's jaw clenched. The colony was just a peaceful farming community, lacking any military defenses. This was a slaughter of the innocent. "Take us in full throttle," Robert ordered. "We need to get boots on the ground for search and rescue." The Retribution swooped into the planet's atmosphere, shuddering as anti-aircraft fire streaked past the hull. Robert led an away team to the surface, rushing into the still smoldering ruins of the colony. Scorched bodies littered the ground, the stench of death thick in the air. Bile rose in Robert's throat at the carnage. Then he heard it, a weak cry from the rubble. He sprinted to the sound and began digging frantically, uncovering a small girl, barely 8 years old. Her chest was soaked with blood, injuries clearly fatal. As Robert cradled her in his arms, the girl looked up at him with pain-glazed eyes. "Please, help us," she whimpered, pressing a small, singed doll into his hands with the last of her strength. Moments later, she went limp, the life fading from her body as Robert watched helplessly. Rage and grief warred within him as he clutched the doll, the only memento of a young life cut brutally short. "I will avenge you," Robert whispered to the broken child, a solemn vow. "I'll make them pay for this. The Denobulans will answer for what they've done here today." The few shell-shocked survivors Robert's team rescued told him this attack had been completely unprovoked. The colony had no value as a military target. It was simply the latest in a long string of atrocities committed by the Denobulans and their leader, the vicious warlord Kalar. For years, his forces had rampaged across the galaxy, wiping out those they considered inferior, with no one able to stand against their technological might and sheer brutality. But as Robert stood on his bridge, the girl's blood-stained doll sitting in front of him as a constant reminder, he knew that was about to change. No longer just another mission, it was now personal. The Denobulans had sown the wind, and now they would reap the whirlwind. The full military might of the human race would be brought to bear with one goal, the complete and total destruction of the Denobulan ability to make war. Kalar and his kind would learn that for all their supposed superiority, they had made a grave error in thinking humanity would ever tolerate such an act of depravity. Humanity would stop at nothing to rid the galaxy of their evil, forever. This was no longer just about this one child, though her murder would be avenged 1,000-fold. This was about the very survival of freedom and decency, in the face of a cruelty that could not be allowed to endure. As Robert prepared for the war to come, he broadcast a message on all frequencies, his words echoing across the stars. "Humanity is coming for you, Denobulans. The retribution you have brought down upon yourselves will be nothing less than the wrath of the righteous. You wanted our attention, now you have it." His gaze fixed on the tattered doll, resolve hardening in Robert's heart. The Denobulans would pay for their crimes, and humanity would collect that toll in blood. The die was cast. The age of human fury had begun. Robert wasted no time. As soon as the retribution docked, he strode into the command center, still clutching the blood-stained doll. His face was a mask of persistence as he compiled the grim evidence of the Denobulan attack, recordings of the bombardment, images of the ruined colony and broken bodies. With a heavy heart, he transmitted it all to human high command, along with an impassioned plea for swift retribution. Then he threw himself into planning their counterattack. He pored over intelligence reports on Denobulan capabilities, each new detail making his gut clench tighter. "Their ships are monsters," Chen said grimly, pointing to grainy schematics. Plasma cannons, multiphasic shields, some kind of energy-dampening weapon, decades ahead of anything we've got. Robert hit his fist on the table, and outnumbering us 3-1. He rubbed his forehead. A straight-up battle would be a bloodbath we can't afford. His console pinged with an incoming message from command. Robert read it, his expression darkening with each word. "Those cowardly politicians," he spat. "They want to avoid escalation. Never mind that the denobulans will keep rampaging until someone stops them." He paced the room, mind racing. The colonies were fractured, bickering over tariffs while a threat loomed that could end them all. And the denobulans' technological edge meant humanity needed to buy time. Robert froze mid-step as an audacious plan crystallized. It was borderline insubordinate, but it might be their only chance. "We have to do this ourselves," he said, meeting the eyes of his senior staff one by one. "First, we bring the colonies in line, make them see what we're really facing. I'll talk to Governor Yao on Nova Prime myself." He turned to Chen. "Lieutenant, I need you intercepting any denobulan transmissions you can. Scan for references to their weapons research, facilities, key personnel. The more we can disrupt their supply lines, the better." Then he faced Vance, his infiltration expert. "You're on the most crucial part. We need that shield tech to give our ships a fighting chance. Find out where it's developed, then get in and get out with the specs." He raised a hand to forestall their questions. "I know it's asking a lot. Command won't sanction this, but we can't wait for orders that may never come. Not with what's at stake. We move quietly, buy humanity the time it needs to face the denobulans head-on." Robert looked down at the tiny doll still clenched in his fist, his voice rough. "The colonies don't know yet that we're at war, but the denobulans have already decided that. It's up to us to make sure we're the ones still standing when it's over." As the Retribution entered Nova Prime's orbit under cloak, Robert felt a curious calm settle over him before the storm to come. For the first time in days, his hand unclenched from the doll, setting it gently on the console. "We won't forget," he promised it softly, then set his shoulders. It was time to start turning the tide. Robert's shuttle touched down on Nova Prime's pristine landing pad. As he disembarked, the towering spires of the colony's capital gleamed in the twin suns. But Robert had no time to admire the view. He strode purposefully towards the government complex, the blood-stained doll tucked into his jacket pocket. Governor Yao's office was a study in opulence, all polished wood and plush carpets. The governor himself sat behind an enormous desk, his carefully neutral expression betraying nothing. "Captain Bailey," Yao said, rising to shake Robert's hand. "I understand you have urgent news." Robert wasted no time. He pulled out a data chip and inserted it into the governor's console. "Sir, I need you to see this." The horrific footage from the denobulan attack played out on the wall-sized screen. Buildings crumbled, bodies fell. And then came the image of the little girl, her life fading in Robert's arms. Yao's face went ashen. This is monstrous," he whispered. "It's why we need Nova Prime's support," Robert pressed. "The denobulans must be stopped." Yao shook his head. "Captain, you know our position. We're a trade hub. Neutrality has kept us safe and prosperous." "With respect, Governor, neutrality is a luxury we can no longer afford," Robert countered. "The denobulans won't stop. Today it was a farming colony. Tomorrow it could be Nova Prime." "My people are scared, Captain," Yao admitted. "We don't have the military might to stand against the denobulans." "That's exactly what they're counting on," Robert said. "But together, we have a chance. Nova Prime could lead the way, show other colonies it's time to fight back." Before Yao could respond, the door burst open. Lieutenant Chen rushed in, datapad in hand. "Captain, sorry to interrupt, but I've intercepted denobulan transmissions. Their lead weapons engineer, Dr. Zolak, is on Baylor right now. He's inspecting some kind of prototype warship." Robert's eyes widened. "When does he leave?" "Less than 12 hours, sir." Robert turned back to Yao. Governor, this is our chance. If we can capture Zolak, we deal a huge blow to the Denobulan war machine. Yao was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. What do you need? Access to your surveillance network on Baylor and a special forces team if you have one. Done, Yao said. Good hunting, Captain. Hours later, Robert crouched in the shadows outside the Denobulan compound on Baylor. Vance and the Nova Prime soldiers flanked him, weapons at the ready. Remember the plan, Robert whispered. We go in fast and quiet. Priority is capturing Zolak alive. A sudden explosion rocked the compound. Their pilot had successfully sabotaged the Denobulan shuttle. Now! Robert shouted. Vance led the charge, his combat knife flashing as he engaged the first Denobulan guard. The Nova Prime soldiers fanned out, their weapons spitting silent death. Robert raced for the command center, following the blueprints they'd obtained. He burst through the door to find a startled Denobulan in an elaborate uniform, Dr. Zolak. Don't move, Robert barked. But Zolak lunged for a console, slamming his hand on a large red button. Alarms blared throughout the compound. Shit, Robert muttered. He tackled Zolak, pinning the Denobulan's arms behind his back. We're leaving. Now. The corridors were chaos as Robert dragged Zolak towards the exit. Denobulan reinforcements poured in, trading fire with the human strike team. We're cut off! Vance shouted. Robert spotted a window. New exit, go! They crashed through the glass, Zolak howling in protest. The team sprinted for their waiting ship, Denobulan energy bolts sizzling past their heads. Robert shoved Zolak into the ship and dove in after him. Go, go, go! The engines roared to life and they rocketed away from Baylor. As the stars blurred into hyperspace lines, Robert allowed himself a small smile. They'd done it. They'd struck back at the Denobulans, and with Nova Prime's support, this was just the beginning. The stealth ship's engines hummed as it jumped to light speed, leaving Baylor far behind. Robert stood in the cargo hold, staring down at the bound Denobulan scientist. Dr. Zolak glared back, his ridged forehead creased with defiance. You won't get anything from me, human, Zolak spat. Robert said nothing. He pulled out a data pad and played the footage of the colony attack. Zolak's eyes widened as he watched buildings crumble and bodies fall. This is what your weapons did, Robert said coldly. A peaceful farming colony. Children. Zolak shook his head. Impossible. Our forces would never... Robert cut him off, playing an intercepted transmission. Zolak's own voice filled the room, discussing weapon specifications for the attack. We have you on record, Doctor, supplying the very weapons used in this massacre. Zolak's arrogance crumbled. I didn't know... Here's the deal, Robert continued. You give us everything. Shielding specs, weapons data, structural weaknesses. In exchange, you might avoid execution for war crimes. Hours passed as Zolak spoke, his words a flood of technical data. Robert's team recorded every detail. When they finally reached the rendezvous point, Robert wasted no time contacting Nova Prime. Governor Yao, patch me through to your top scientists. We've got Denobulan military secrets, shields, weapons, the works. Time to even the odds. As Nova Prime's research teams poured over the intel, Robert turned to Chen. Get that colony footage out. Every human world needs to see what we're up against. Chen nodded grimly. On it, Captain. Days blurred together as humanity mobilized. Nova Prime's shipyards ran hot, churning out vessels filled with reverse-engineered Denobulan tech. Robert worked tirelessly, coordinating with other races who'd suffered under Denobulan aggression. In his quarters late one night, Robert pored over star charts. He marked potential shipyard locations, each hidden from Denobulan sensors. A knock at the door interrupted his planning. Enter, he called. Chen stepped in, datapad in hand. Sir, I've prepared the disinformation package. If the Denobulans take the bait... Robert nodded. They'll think we're hitting minor outposts. Good work, Lieutenant. Let's give Keelar something to chase while we build our real strength here. Weeks passed. Robert stood on the bridge of humanity's new flagship, watching as ship after ship joined the growing armada around Nova Prime. Zolak worked alongside human engineers, fine-tuning weapons to exploit denobulan vulnerabilities. "Sir," a sensor operator called out. "Multiple contacts entering the system. It's the denobulan fleet." Robert allowed himself a grim smile. "Right on schedule. All ships, battle stations. Let's show these bastards what happens when you underestimate humanity." The void lit up as the human fleet unleashed its first salvo. Streams of superheated plasma lanced out, burning through denobulan shields effortlessly. Explosions bloomed in silence as ship after ship fell to weapons they'd never expected to face. "Press the attack," Robert ordered. "Don't let up." The battle raged, but it was clear from the start. The denobulans had walked into a trap of their own making. Their technological edge, their greatest pride, had become their downfall. As Kalar's vaunted armada crumbled around him, Robert knew this was only the beginning. The reckoning war had begun, and humanity would not rest until the denobulan threat was extinguished from the galaxy. The bridge of the human flagship erupted in cheers as the last denobulan warship crumbled under their relentless assault. Robert Bailey stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The initial victory was sweet, but he knew better than to savor it. "All ships form up," he barked into the comm. "We press the advantage now, no respite." The counter-armada surged forward, their newly upgraded shields glowing with an eerie blue light. Robert watched as squadrons of strike craft swarmed ahead, diving between the disorganized denobulan capital ships. "Sir, incoming transmission from Nova Prime surface," Lieutenant Chen called out. Governor Yao's face appeared on screen, his expression grim but determined. "Captain, our ground defenses are holding. Those shield disruptors are tearing through their troops without effort." Robert nodded. "Keep the pressure on, Governor. We'll handle things up here." The view screen flickered back to the battle. Human ships darted and weaved through the denobulan formation, their plasma cannons carving molten gashes in enemy hulls. Denobulan crews spilled into the void, their screams silenced by the vacuum of space. "Sir!" Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "We're receiving reports from across the sector. Other colonies are rising up." Robert's eyes widened as he scanned the incoming data. Oppressed races, emboldened by humanity's sudden show of strength, were throwing off their denobulan overlords. Even some denobulans themselves were turning against Kalar's regime. A proximity alarm blared. Robert's gaze snapped to the tactical display, where a massive denobulan warship was attempting to flee the system. "That's Kalar's flagship," he growled. "All ships concentrate fire. Don't let that bastard escape." The counter-armada's battle cruisers moved into formation, their weapons ports glowing with barely contained energy. "Nova Force plasma bombs armed and ready, sir," the weapons officer reported. Robert's hand hovered over the fire control. He thought of the little girl on that ravaged colony, her life snuffed out by denobulan cruelty. His fingers tightened into a fist. "Fire," he said, his voice cold and final. The void lit up as salvo after salvo of miniature black holes streaked towards Kalar's ship. The denobulan vessel's shields flickered and died under the onslaught. Hull plating buckled and tore away as the artificial singularities consumed everything in their path. When the barrage finally ceased, only a twisted husk of metal remained, spinning lifelessly in space. A single escape pod jettisoned from the wreckage, streaking away towards denobulan space. Robert watched it go, his heart made. "Track that pod," he ordered. "We're not done with Kalar yet." As the dust settled, Robert turned his attention to the liberated colonies. Strike teams and stealth cruisers fanned out across the sector, delivering weapons and supplies to resistance cells on denobulan-held worlds. In his quarters later, Robert pored over star charts and tactical readouts. The denobulan homeworld of Zindor loomed large in his mind, a final bastion of the empire that had brought so much suffering to the galaxy. A knock at the door interrupted his planning. Governor Yao entered, his face etched with concern. "Captain," he said, "I've been speaking with the other colony leaders. We're prepared to commit everything to this fight, but the cost—" Robert stood, his eyes blazing with conviction. "Governor, We have no choice. The Denobulans started this war and we'll finish it. For every innocent life they've taken, for every world they've ravaged, we'll make them pay. Yao nodded slowly. Then let it be done. I'll inform the other colonies. We rally behind you, Captain Bailey. As the governor left, Robert turned back to the star chart. His finger traced a path to Sindor, the Denobulan homeworld. The final push would require every ounce of strength humanity could muster. But as he touched the small doll in his pocket, a reminder of all they'd lost, Robert knew failure was not an option. The war for galactic survival had begun in earnest, and humanity would not rest until the Denobulan threat was extinguished from the stars. Robert Bailey stood at the command center of Nova Prime, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the sector. The devastation wrought upon Kalar's forces hung like a ghostly reminder of their recent victory. But Robert knew this was just the beginning. Governor Yao, Commander Vance, he addressed his top lieutenants, I need you both to embark on a crucial mission. Visit every major human settlement in the sector. We need their support for our final push against Zindor. Yao nodded gravely. Many colonies have maintained neutrality for years. It won't be easy to sway them. Show them the footage, Robert replied, his voice hard. Let them see what we're truly up against. As Yao and Vance departed on their diplomatic blitz, Robert turned his attention to the growing resistance across Denobulan space. Reports flooded in of sabotage operations and uprisings on occupied worlds. Alliance Special Forces, working in tandem with local insurgents, struck at key Denobulan installations. On the factory world of Nelvana III, human operatives infiltrated a shipyard, planting explosives throughout the facility. The resulting chain reaction reduced the orbital dry docks to twisted debris, crippling Kalar's efforts to replenish his fleet. Meanwhile, in the labs of Nova Prime, Dr. Zolek hunched over a workstation, sweat beading on his ridged forehead. Human scientists surrounded him, their faces etched with concentration as they pored over schematics and test results. We've improved the yield on the Singularity Lances by 37%, Zolak reported, his voice tinged with a mix of pride and regret. But Kalar's not sitting idle. He'll be working on countermeasures. Robert nodded, studying the readouts. Keep pushing. Every advantage counts. Weeks turned to months as the Alliance prepared for its final assault. Robert walked the halls of a newly constructed warship, marveling at the gleaming Nova Force cannons and sleek ion destabilizers that lined its hull. Each vessel represented humanity's commitment to end the Denobulan threat once and for all. As the combined fleet assembled, a sea of ships stretching as far as the eye could see, Robert addressed the gathered captains and crews. Today, we strike at the heart of those who sought to exterminate us. Remember Nova Prime. Remember every world ravaged, every life lost. Today we fight not just for vengeance, but for the future of our entire galaxy. A deafening roar filled the comm channels as 5,000 warships surged forward, their engines blazing against the void. As they approached Zindor, long-range singularity cannons opened fire. Massive gravitational distortions tore through space, ripping apart the orbital defense platforms that ringed the Denobulan homeworld. Kellar's depleted forces scrambled to mount a defense, but wave after wave of Alliance fighter bombers punched through their lines. Armor-piercing disruptors found their marks with deadly precision, leaving Denobulan capital ships drifting and powerless. In a moment of desperation, Robert watched as Allied cruisers pushed their hyperdrives beyond safe limits. Space itself seemed to scream as localized rifts formed, shredding Denobulan ships caught in their wake. The sacrifice bought precious time for the main assault force to close on Sindor. As the space above the planet devolved into chaos, Robert led the ground assault on Alluria City. Dropships screamed through the atmosphere, anti-aircraft fires streaking past their hulls. The streets of the Denobulan capital became a battleground, the acrid smell of weapons fire filling the air. Robert charged forward, plasma rifle in hand, as Allied forces pushed deeper into the heart of the city. Each step brought them closer to Kellar's stronghold, and the final reckoning that would decide the fate of the galactic realm. Robert Bailey stood at the helm of the lead dropship, his eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching surface of Shindor. The planet's once pristine landscape now bore the scars of orbital bombardment, great craters pockmarking the terrain leading to Aluria City. "All units, prepare for touchdown," he barked into the comm. "Remember your training. We hit hard and fast." As the dropship screamed through the atmosphere, Robert's mind raced. Vance's infiltration teams had already descended hours earlier. Their success would determine the fate of this entire operation. The dropship shuddered as it punctured the cloud layer. Robert's grip tightened on the overhead rail as the cityscape came into view. Alluria's gleaming spires and fortified bunkers stretched to the horizon, a testament to Denobulan engineering and hubris. Suddenly, explosions blossomed across the city's perimeter. Vance's voice crackled over the comm. "Shields are down! I repeat, shields are down!" Robert wasted no time. "All ships commence bombardment. Concentrate fire on exposed sectors." The sky lit up as Alliance warships unleashed their fury. Lances of pure energy sliced through the air, carving molten furrows through Alluria's defenses. Singularity bombs detonated in eerie silence, their gravitational pull tearing apart buildings and war machines alike. As the dropships neared the ground, Robert watched Denobulan commanders scramble to erect makeshift particle barriers. The shimmering field sputtered to life, only to collapse moments later under the relentless assault. "Brace for impact!" Robert shouted as his dropship plunged through the curtain of destruction. The moment the hatch opened, chaos erupted. Power-armored shock troops poured out, their boots crunching on the rubble-strewn streets. Robert charged forward, plasma rifle at the ready. "Push towards the central ziggurat," he ordered, gesturing towards the looming structure at the heart of the city. The air filled with the staccato of weapons fire as Denobulan guards mounted a fierce counterattack. Robert ducked behind a fallen pillar, the smell of ozone and burning flesh assaulting his nostrils. Block by block, the Alliance forces inched closer to their objective. The streets ran red with blood, human and Denobulan alike. Robert pushed the rising body count from his mind, focusing solely on the mission at hand. As they neared the ziggurat, a frantic transmission cut through the din of battle. "Sir! Intel reports Kalar is on the move. Heavily armored convoy heading east." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Patch me through to orbital command. Now." Moments later, he barked new orders into his comm link. "Retask all available siege batteries. Target these coordinates. Maximum yield." The sky above Aluria City seemed to split open as a barrage of Nova-level singularity warheads descended. The detonation that followed defied description, a cataclysmic unleashing of destructive power that vaporized entire city blocks in an instant. As the blinding light faded, Robert surveyed the devastation. Where Kalar's convoy had been, there was now only a smoldering crater, half a kilometer wide. "All units, push forward," Robert commanded, his voice raw. "Search the impact zone. I want Kalar found, dead or alive." Hours passed as Alliance troops combed through the ruins. The air was thick with smoke and the cries of the wounded. Robert moved methodically, his eyes scanning the twisted metal and shattered concrete for any sign of the Denobulan warlord. A shout went up from a nearby search team. Robert rushed over, his heart pounding. There, amid a tangle of bodies and wreckage, lay Kalar. The once proud Denobulan leader was barely recognizable, his flesh seared and broken. As the Alliance troops dragged Kalar before him, Robert felt a cold fury settle over him. The Denobulan's eyes met his, and a sound escaped Kalar's ruined lips, a broken, insane laugh that sent chills down Robert's spine. Robert's hand tightened around the small doll in his pocket, a reminder of all that had been lost. With deliberate slowness, he raised his sidearm, aiming it squarely at Kalar's forehead. The shot rang out, echoing across the ruined cityscape. Kalar's body crumpled to the ground, the mad light in his eyes finally extinguished. As the doll slipped from Robert's fingers, bouncing once on the rubble-strewn ground, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The long nightmare was over. Humanity had prevailed. Robert stood amid the ruins of Aluria City, his boots crunching on shattered glass and twisted metal. The acrid stench of burning plastics and ozone filled his nostrils. All around him, Alliance troops moved with purpose, securing buildings and rounding up the last pockets of denobulan resistance. A young lieutenant approached, datapad in hand. "Sir, we've got confirmed surrenders coming in from across the planet. Denobulan ships are powering down weapons and requesting terms." Robert nodded, his face etched with exhaustion. "Process them quickly. I want a full planetary lockdown within the hour." As the lieutenant hurried off, Robert's comm crackled to life. "Captain Bailey, urgent transmission from Intel. You need to hear this." Moments later, Robert listened with growing unease to the intercepted message. General Dolak's voice, filled with fanatical fervor, echoed in his ear. "To all true sons of Zindor, our cowardly brothers may surrender, but we will fight on. From our ancient redoubt beneath the polar ice, we will wage eternal war against these human invaders. Let them come. Our weapons will reduce their worlds to ash." Robert's eyes sharp. He strode to the makeshift command center, barking orders as he went. "I want every scrap of intel on this polar redoubt. Now!" Hours later, Robert stood before a hastily assembled war council. Holograms flickered, showing schematics of a vast underground complex. "This facility houses weapons beyond our worst nightmares," Robert explained, his voice hard. "If even a fraction of what we've uncovered is true, Dolak could reignite this war for generations." An older Alliance admiral spoke up. "Perhaps we should explore diplomatic channels, offer terms." "No," Robert cut him off. "These aren't soldiers we're dealing with. They're zealots. There's only one way to end this." Silence fell over the room. Robert looked each council member in the eye. "We go in. We wipe them out. To the last man." The next days were a blur of activity. Nova-class dreadnoughts moved into position over Sindor's northern pole. The air filled with the constant thunder of siege batteries as they hammered the ice, searching for weaknesses in the redoubt's ancient shields. Robert watched from a forward command post as specialized landers touched down on the blasted tundra. Commander Vance's voice crackled over the comm. "Establishing beachhead Echo 7, heavy denobulan counterattack, requesting immediate fire support." Robert grabbed the comm. "All batteries, danger close fire mission on Echo 7, give them hell." The sky lit up as orbital strikes rained down. Robert could only imagine the carnage below as Alliance troops fought to hold their positions against waves of denobulan fanatics. Weeks crawled by. The constant bombardment took its toll on man and machine alike. But slowly, inexorably, the Alliance forces pushed forward. Finally, a breathless report came in. "Sir, we've breached the outer shields." Robert wasted no time. He boarded a dropship, joining the first wave of orbital drop troopers as they plunged into the yawning chasm torn in Shindor's surface. The labyrinth of tunnels beneath the ice was a nightmare of twisting corridors and booby-trapped chambers. Robert led from the front, his armor scorched and dented as they fought their way deeper into the complex. A sickly green mist filled one passage. Robert watched in horror as it melted through a trooper's faceplate. "Bioweapons!" he shouted. "Seal your suits!" They pushed on, fighting room by room, meter by meter. The denobulans threw everything they had at the advancing humans, flesh-eating nanites, gravity weapons that crushed men in their own armor, and worse. In a cavernous chamber filled with crackling energy conduits, Robert saw Commander Vance fall. A denobulan ambush caught the veteran soldier off guard. Robert could only watch as his friend's life signs flatlined. Grief threatened to overwhelm him, but Robert pushed it down. He had a job to finish. At last, they reached the central citadel. Robert's eyes widened as he took in the arsenal arrayed before them. Antimatter warheads, singularity bombs, weapons that could unmake worlds. A cold voice rang out. "One step closer, human, and I'll turn your precious colonies to cosmic dust." General Dolak stood at a control panel, his finger hovering over a dead man's switch. Behind him, the last of his cultists readied their weapons. Robert met Dolak's gaze. Without hesitation, he raised his rifle and fired. Robert squeezed the trigger. The plasma bolt struck Dolak square in the chest, vaporizing a fist-sized hole through his torso. The Denobulan general crumpled to the ground, his fingers slipping from the dead man's switch. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then chaos erupted as the remaining Denobulan cultists charged forward in a suicidal last stand. Robert and his troops cut them down with ruthless efficiency, their armor-piercing rounds shredding through the fanatics' ceremonial robes. As the last echoes of gunfire faded, Robert surveyed the cavernous chamber. The arsenal of world-ending weapons loomed before him, a stark reminder of how close they'd come to annihilation. "Secure these weapons," he ordered, his voice hoarse. "Every last one." Weeks later, Robert stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship as it entered orbit around Nova Prime. The view screen showed a planet alive with celebration. Fireworks bloomed across city skylines. Crowds thronged the streets, waving Alliance flags. Admiral Chen approached, offering a congratulatory salute. "They're calling you the savior of humanity, sir." Robert's expression remained grim. "Don't let them get complacent, Admiral. This war isn't over." Chen's brow furrowed. "Sir, the Denobulan regime has fallen. Their fleets are in ruins." "For now," Robert replied, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. "But there are still Denobulan hardliners out there, nursing their grudges. We need to be ready when they try to rise again." In the days that followed, Robert found himself locked in heated debates with the Alliance High Command. He paced the length of the war room, his voice rising as he made his case. "A permanent deterrent force," he insisted, hitting his fist on the holographic display. "Rapid response fleet stationed across our key systems. We can't afford to let our guard down." Admiral Tsu, a grizzled veteran of the early war, shook his head. "The cost would be astronomical. We need to focus on rebuilding, not—" "The cost of complacency would be higher," Robert cut him off. "I've seen what the Denobulans are capable of. If we give them an inch, they'll take everything." Days of tense negotiation followed. Robert worked tirelessly, calling in favors and leveraging his newfound celebrity. Finally, the Council reached a decision. "Very well, Supreme Commander Bailey," Fleet Admiral Yoshida announced, her tone formal. "You'll have your deterrent force. Nova Prime will serve as the Central Command nexus." Robert nodded, allowing himself a small smile of satisfaction. "Thank you, Admiral. We'll make humanity safe, whatever it takes." The next months were a whirlwind of activity. Robert oversaw the formation of elite armadas, equipping them with reverse-engineered Denobulan superweapons. Massive shipyards sprung up across Alliance space, churning out new warships at a dizzying pace. On the factory floor of one such facility, Robert watched as defecting Denobulan scientists worked alongside human engineers. The air hummed with the sound of plasma welders and the hiss of coolant systems. Dr. Kelax, a former Denobulan weapons designer, approached Robert with a data pad. "Supreme Commander, we've made a breakthrough with the Singularity Cannon designs. If these simulations are correct, we can increase yield by 300% without compromising stability." Robert nodded approvingly. "Excellent work, Doctor. Push forward with the prototypes." As he turned to leave, Robert caught sight of a human worker glaring at Kalax. The Supreme Commander made a mental note to increase security screenings. They couldn't afford any sabotage, intentional or otherwise. Aboard the newly christened dreadnought Horizon's Edge, Robert observed as crews ran subspace stress tests on experimental warp corridors. The ship shuddered as it pushed the boundaries of known physics. "Sir," the lead scientist reported, "we're achieving near-instantaneous transit across distances that would have taken weeks before. It's revolutionary." Robert's eyes narrowed. "And you're certain the Denobulans don't have this capability?" "Positive, sir. We kept it under wraps during the Zindor campaign to prevent Dolak from potentially using it for a doomsday strike." "Good," Robert nodded. "Keep pushing the envelope. I want us to be able to reach any system in the galaxy at a moment's notice." Back on Nova Prime, Robert stood before a gathering of Alliance leaders. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy as he outlined his vision for the future. "We're offering membership to former Denobulan subject worlds," he explained. "Equal partnership in a new interstellar republic, but make no mistake, we will maintain overwhelming military superiority." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. Senator Tarak, a vocal critic of Robert's hardline stance, stood to speak. "Supreme Commander, some of us are concerned about the escalation of our arsenal. These weapons, antimatter warheads, artificial singularities, they're too powerful. We risk becoming the very thing we fought against." Robert's gaze hardened. "Senator, I appreciate your concerns, but as long as Denobulan militarist ideology persists, we must remain vigilant. These deterrents will ensure peace through strength." As the years passed, Robert's paranoia only grew. He instituted rigorous security protocols across the fleets, authorizing regular purges to root out potential dissidents or sleeper agents. In his private quarters aboard the command station, Vigilant Sentinel, Robert pored over intelligence reports. The holographic displays showed the locations of rapid response fleets, ready to unleash overwhelming force at a moment's notice. A chime sounded, and his aide entered. "Sir, the latest loyalty screenings are complete. We've identified 3 potential security risks in the Arcturus sector." Robert nodded grimly. "Detain them for further questioning. We can't afford to take any chances." As he turned back to the star charts, Robert allowed himself a moment of reflection. The Alliance had known peace for decades now, the Denobulan threat contained by the ever-present specter of orbital extinction strikes. A new generation had grown up never knowing the terror of alien invasion. Yet Robert remained ever watchful, his finger always hovering near the... Decades passed. Robert Bailey's hair turned gray, his face etched with lines of constant vigilance. He stood on the command deck of the Eternal Vigilance, Nova Prime's flagship, overseeing a routine stellar reformation drill. "Initiate sequence," he ordered, his voice gruff from years of barking commands. The view screen lit up as a rogue star system flared brilliantly. Swarms of nanites swarmed its surface, reshaping matter at the atomic level. In minutes, the star collapsed, its energy harnessed and redirected. "Drill complete, sir," reported Captain Lena Chen, Admiral Chen's daughter. "All parameters within acceptable limits." Robert nodded, allowing himself a small measure of satisfaction. The drill demonstrated humanity's ability to reshape the very fabric of space-time, a potent deterrent against any who might challenge Alliance supremacy. His moment of calm shattered as alarms blared across the bridge. Lieutenant Vance, son of his old friend, rushed to his station. "Sir, we've intercepted encrypted data bursts from the Denobulan remnant worlds," Vance reported, his fingers flying across the hollow interface. It's not good." Robert's eyes narrowed as he scanned the decoded transmissions. Sporadic attacks on Alliance outposts, sabotage of terraforming equipment, manifestos calling for the overthrow of human oppressors. "Separatists," he spat. "I warned the Council this would happen." But as he dug deeper into the intel, Robert's blood ran cold. Hidden among the chatter were schematics, weapons designs he'd hoped never to see again. "Singularity warheads," he breathed. "How in hell did they get these?" Within hours, Robert convened an emergency summit of the Alliance leadership. He paced before the assembled dignitaries, his weathered face grim. "The threat is real," he insisted, hitting his fist on the podium. "These cultists have obtained weapons that could unmake entire star systems. We must act now, with overwhelming force, to stamp out this infection before it spreads." Murmurs of discontent rippled through the chamber. Ambassador Talak of New Denobula rose, his voice dripping with disdain. "Always quick to reach for the sword, aren't you, Supreme Commander?" Talak sneered. "These cultists, as you call them, are freedom fighters, resisting decades of human tyranny. Your so-called evidence is nothing but fabricated warmongering." Robert's face flushed with anger. "You fool! Do you have any idea what's at stake?" But Talak was not finished. With a gesture, he activated a hollow projector in the center of the chamber. The air filled with images that made Robert's stomach churn. Bodies piled in mass graves on frontier worlds, dissidents strapped to neural resequencers, their minds shattered by invasive interrogation. Orbital strikes reducing entire cities to ash. This is the true face of Bailey's regime, Talak declared. Torture, executions, genocide, all in the name of security. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted accusations, threatening to withdraw from the alliance. Robert struggled to regain control, but the tide had turned against him. To his horror, he saw Captain Chen and Lieutenant Vance step forward, the children of his oldest friends, raised in the heart of Nova Prime's military. "We've seen the logs," Lena Chen said, her voice trembling. "The black site prisons, the conditioning camps for potential threats. It's all true." Vance nodded, his eyes full of disgust. "You've become the very thing we swore to destroy, a tyrant, a monster." Robert reeled, struggling to process this betrayal, but before he could respond, a final blow fell. Dr. Zolak, the denobulan defector who had aided their weapons research for decades, appeared on the main viewer. The old alien's face was gaunt, his eyes sunken as he lay on his deathbed. "I must confess," Zolak wheezed. "The Singularity warheads, I recreated them in secret. A final safeguard against human tyranny. Robert, my old friend, I fear you have fallen into the same darkness that consumed Kalar." The chamber fell silent. Robert stood alone, the weight of his choices crushing down upon him. But even now, faced with the enormity of his actions, he could not falter. With a snarl, he keyed in his supreme override codes. Across subspace, sleeper agents and black ops teams received their final orders. "I'll hunt them down," Robert growled. "Every last cultist, every separatist, by any means necessary." And so began a shadowy war that would consume decades and span the breadth of the galaxy. Orphaned children, their minds wiped and rebuilt as living weapons, infiltrated rebel cells, engineered plagues ravaged entire colonies. Psychic broadcasts drove millions to madness and violence. Through it all, Robert watched from the shadows, convinced that each atrocity was a necessary evil to save humanity from extinction.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.